All right, so we're now into the third part of this lecture on the economic context of social welfare policy. And so we're going to dive in here to discussing the earned income tax credit. But before we do so, I just want to point out that you may have noticed this is probably a bit more, this lecture has probably been a bit more complicated than other lectures. And so we've run through some calculations. We'll run through a few more here. And so I just want to point out that these aren't just calculations for calculation's sake. I think the best way for students to understand how tax policies work is to actually run through these calculations manually. I don't think there's any substitute for it. And so that's just a little bit about my reasoning for why I take you through those mechanical calculations. Okay, and so with that in mind, we'll go ahead and dive in here to discussing EITC. This was a program that was passed in 1975 after a series of experiments at the state level with negative income taxes. And most famously, you had a New Jersey negative income tax experiment with the primary issue there being a theme that we've talked about before. And so the concern is with government support and how that might impact the individual work effort. And so what the researchers did there was to assign participants to treatment group, and then a control group. And so they provided earning supplements to the treatment group. They withheld the earning supplement from the control group, and so they measured the number of hours worked to see what sort of impact those supplements might have. And it was found that the group that received the government earning supplement actually worked greater number of hours relative to the group that didn't receive the earning supplement. And so as a result of this experiment and others conducted by other states across the US, that's sort of the historical impetus by which we passed the earned income tax credit. And so you'll notice in the title, this is in fact an earned income tax credit. So you must have earnings to qualify. You must work, in other words, to receive this earning supplement. And we noted before that this is in fact fully refundable. And we noted before about how that might impact low-income populations, much more favorable, of course, than a non-refundable credit. All right, so behind me, you'll notice what may look like gobbledygook. And so I want to propose that there is a structure, an underlying structure to the earned income tax credit. It's just a matter of repeating the structure over and over when you think about how the actual credit gets calculated. And so let me just use the blackboard here for a second. Let me just show you graphically what the structure of the EITC looks like. And so let me point out here. I'll just label my axes first. On the X or horizontal axis, this is, let's put earnings, right? Earnings on the horizontal or X axis. On the vertical or Y axis, let's put, once again in dollars, this is the actual credit amount that one may be entitled to. And so what that table was showing before is a schedule for how much one is entitled to if you're a single individual. There's a separate schedule for single individuals, separate schedule for married couples. But for single individuals, if you're a single individual with no kids, or depending on the number of kids that you have, it's the same structure. There's a phase-in structure. There's a phase-in part. There's a plateau part. And then there's a phase-out part that you'll see here in this graph. And so the way the EITC works, on the first dollar that you earn, you're going to get back 7.65%. That's what this table is showing. So for a single individual with no kids, on the first dollar that you earn, you'll get back a credit in the amount of 7.65% or 7.65 cents on the first dollar, on the second dollar, all the way up to the $6,580th dollar. I didn't mean to do that. So this is what it's showing here. This first bend point, $6,580. So all the way up to that bend point, or that earnings amount, you're going to get back 7.65%, 7.65 cents on each dollar up to that amount. And that's the point at which your earned income tax credit is in fact maxed out. So the cap, we'll note here, is $503. We saw that here. The maximum credit amount is $503. And then if you exceed $6,580 of earnings as an individual with no kids, and there's a point at which you may earn so much that the government starts to claw back that maximum credit of $503. And so that amount we're pointing out here, that clawback begins at $8,240 of earnings. Right? So this bend point here is at $8,240. At which point the government will start to claw back each additional dollar that you earn at a rate of 7.65%, okay, until the credit is completely phased out. So this is the basic structure that you're seeing for an individual with no kids. And so we can just simply repeat the structure. You'd have, if you're drawing to scale here, you'd have a much higher graph here for a single individual with one child, with two children, or 3 or more kids. I just want to point out here the maximum credit allowed for the number of kids. So if you have no kids, $503. If you have one child, notice that that maximum credit just jumps up significantly. You have $3,359. If you have 2 children, that maximum credit is $5,548. If you have 3 or more kids, it's $6,242. Certainly not an inconsequential amount for low-income populations in the way of an earnings supplement. Okay, so let me just erase this real quick. All right, so let's go through a sample calculation and think about how the actual credit amount might be figured. All right, so here's the hypothetical. Here's a scenario. You have a single parent with 2 kids, and he or she earned $19,000 in the way of gross income last year. Okay, and so the first thing I note here is that, there's no income tax liability. All right, so this person, this low income, what we're characterizing as a low income worker, doesn't owe anything in the way of taxes. I said that's a typical scenario for low income workers. And that's because, of course, we've applied exemptions and our standard deduction, which basically wipes out all taxable income and which leaves this person with no tax liability. If you recall from the last section of this lecture, the exemption amount is $4,000. This person, there are 3 people in the filing unit, right? On the basis of the fact that this person is caring for 3 people, right, including himself or herself, that's a basic reduction of $12,000, right? Just right off the bat. So that taxable income goes from $19,000 to $7,000 on the basis of those applicable exemptions. And then if you think about the standard deductions, so assuming that this person is filing as head of household, right, this person will take the larger deduction as opposed to the standard deduction for a single individual, if assuming a rational person who's seeking to maximize their benefits here. So that's a further reduction. That's going to wipe out this person's taxable income entirely, and therefore this person has no tax liability. Okay, so that's the first part of this calculation, and it's at that point at which the tax credit actually comes into play. So this person has no tax liability, and so the basic question here is how much is this person entitled to in the way of a tax credit? Well, we noted in the previous table that we have to go to the appropriate schedule. So this person has 2 kids. The maximum credit for a single individual with 2 kids was $5,548. That's what I'm pointing out here. And then the next issue that you have to ask yourself, next question you have to ask is, well, is there a clawback? Right? So is this person making so much that the government will start, that there's some sort of clawback in place? Well, where does the clawback start? You'll notice that the clawback starts at an earnings amount of $18,110. This person earned $19,000, and so this person will have a clawback. This person will have a clawback in the amount of the difference between gross earnings, right, in the way of earned income and that bend point. And so that's what I'm noting here in the way of that difference. The difference between $19,000 and that bend point of $18,110 is $890. And so we note here that the clawback rate is 21% of earnings in excess of the bend point. And so that's what I've calculated in parentheses here, and that amount comes out to $186.90 as the amount of the clawback. And so once again, if we go back to the initial question of how much is this person entitled to in the way of an EITC or a tax credit, you take the maximum credit, right? The maximum credit of $5,548, and then you'll subtract the clawback, and so you'll note that this person will receive a credit in the amount of $5,361 and then some change. Okay, and so all I'm showing here additionally is just taking that credit amount, taking it as a proportion of gross earnings, and you'll note that it's certainly not inconsequential. 28.22% of this person's gross earnings that this person gets back in the way of a tax credit, and so this is a major boon to this individual, right, who's caring for 2 kids, certainly. Okay, and so at this point, this is another exercise with a different scenario here. You have a single parent one child with gross earnings of $17,000. And I also note here that you should assume that this person is filing as head of household. And so you can do this just for practice on your own. I'm going to leave this to you all to go through on your own, right, to understand how much this person may be entitled to in the way of a tax credit. Okay? All right, the last point here is just to stress the importance of EITC. I noted before that this is the second largest anti-poverty policy that we have in place today, second only to the food stamp program or SNAP. And so there are other issues that have come to the forefront recently, but most notably in the way of fraud or potential fraud. That is, you noticed the different amounts that you might be entitled to in the way of the number of kids that you have, and so people are making some claims that they have some qualifying children where you may have non-custodial parents claiming that the children are living with them for a certain amount of the year and so forth. And so one of the big issues nowadays with EITC is about fraud. And so, I just make a couple points at the end here about the nature or the magnitude of the program in terms of how much we're spending and the number of recipients. So $62 billion total, 27 million families receiving this credit as of 2011. So certainly an important program for our purposes. So that should conclude. That concludes this lecture on EITC. And next week we'll pick up with the issue of diversity. There are various dimensions of diversity. We'll just pick up with talking about race, ethnicity, and gender. And so that'll be on the schedule for next week.